Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces today. The last project that my second graders did talked all about geometric shapes, things like squares, triangles, perfect circles, rectangles. But for today, I want to talk about organic shapes. When we say the word organic, it means a lot of different things. Some of you might be thinking about foods that you might get at the grocery store that say organic on the label. Some of you might be thinking about going out into nature and seeing things like trees and bushes and vines. And in art, when we say the word organic, we're really referring to any shape that is not a geometric shape. So that's a geometric shape. That is an organic shape. Now, the reason we call it organic is because that does refer to nature. And when we look at nature, we don't see geometric shapes. We see lots of curves, lots of things that are not perfectly straight, things that, there may be some things in nature that are like perfect circles, or sometimes you see rocks that have nice flat edges. But for the most part, when we look at nature, we see shapes like these, shapes like these, shapes that aren't straight. So for today, we're going to be practicing organic shapes. And to do that, we'll start with a tree. So to draw a tree, we make a rectangle and a big bush on top, right? No. That's not what trees look like. If we want a tree to look lifelike and natural and organic, we want it to be wider at the bottom where it goes into the ground, where the tree roots are going down into the ground. We're only going to see like the top of the roots, but notice how wide it is at the bottom, and then the trunk itself gets narrower as it goes up. Also notice that it's bending and twisting and crooked. It's not going to be straight. And then we're going to see branches coming off. So the branches are going to follow the same pattern as the trunk. Notice how right here, that part of the branch is wider and it gets narrower and comes to a point at the end. And we don't want our branches to all be at the same level. We want some to be lower, some to be higher. And we also want to consider that the branches will have branches coming off of the branches. And then the branches that come off of the branches will have smaller branches coming off of their branches. And again, just keeping the thought that each branch kind of twists and bends. And I'm going to erase my ugly tree so that I have room here to keep going. Notice that each branch kind of goes off on its own. There's just layers of branches, and I could just keep on going. I could keep drawing branches for like an hour here and just make more and more and more. Also notice that the branches are all kind of reaching upwards. There are some types of trees where the branches kind of come down, but for the most part, most trees, the branches reach upwards towards the sun. And so I don't want to start drawing branches that hang down like that. That would just look awkward. All right, and then, instead of, like we did earlier, we had the rectangle with the big bushy thing on top. Instead of having that big bushy thing be mostly round, we want the foliage or the leaves to kind of follow around the ends of the branches. And there's going to be different layers of these. They're going to be wrapping around each other because like you wouldn't see leaves in this part. The leaves are all going to be coming from the branches. All right, so there we have a tree that looks much more lifelike and realistic. Well, now that we understand some of those basic concepts, let's recap. Most of the shapes that we see here start out wide and come to a point at the end. These shapes are not straight. They are crooked and bent in lots of different directions. And these shapes are repeated, where we have the same shape repeated, smaller and smaller, coming out from itself. With all that in mind, let's practice some more nature shapes. A hook or a horn would be round at the bottom, curved, and gets smaller as it comes to a point. A vine would be wavy and wiggly, but not like equal waves. Notice that this wave is different from this wave. And then, to give it some thickness, we will match that parallel. Notice I'm going slow, taking my time, trying to match exactly the same, keeping the same distance here as I have here, as I have here, as I have here, as I have here. Now, this would be a shape you could use for a vine or a snake or a worm or lots of things in nature. But if it was a vine, then it would have little tendrils coming off of it. Little loopy, vines climb up things. They climb up trees, they climb up houses, they climb up rocks, and they do that with these little tendrily wrap-around curlicue kind of branches. And some kinds of vines also have thorns on them, so we could go back to our horn/thorn shape and copy it onto our vine. Okay, so here we've used organic shapes to draw a tree, to draw a horn, to draw a vine. But can we use organic shapes that don't necessarily look like nature? What would happen if I just dropped a bunch of paint and it just splatted? Would it make a circle puddle? No. It would have lots of goopy, splatty kind of shapes coming out from it. Kind of like that. With maybe some other little tendrils of splattiness coming out. Notice that these shapes use lots of loops and even teardrop shapes. And no straight lines. And notice how this is kind of like an oval, but not quite, because it's pointy at one end and it kind of curves. These are also organic shapes. Now it's your turn to come up with some interesting organic shapes. Just play around and see what happens. Play around with curves. Play around with patterns of things that do the same thing but get smaller. See what you can come up with. So here's a whole bunch of examples of just interesting, fun little doodles that you can make with organic shapes. And here are some famous artworks that use a lot of organic shapes. Now that you've practiced making organic shapes and seen them in other people's artwork, what do you think you can do with organic shapes in your artwork?